I got a very interesting question recently from a Patreon about the chances of Napoleon being able to invade Britain in the early 19th century, because I talked extensively about Sea Lion in that video, but what were the chances of Napoleon, especially since this is rarely covered. Now, the situation was basically from 1803 to 1805 was the following. In 1802, there was the Treaty of Amiens, which brought a peace between France and England. But in 1803, England declared war again, and it was allied with Austria and Russia at this point. And in 1804, Spain also joined on the French side. So this becomes later more important because Spain had a rather large fleet. But let's look at the situation of the French and British army first. So basically the British army was rather weak. It was always seen as a luxury. It was never the first line of defense like for all the continental countries. And so it was always treated, well, with a certain respect of disregard. There were also various fortifications and everything, but there was also not a unified command at this point. Another issue is troop movement was usually rather slow. Of course, the other aspect was that any invading army would have a very limited amount of cavalry, if cavalry at all. And then there was also a certain amount of volunteers on the British side, but the problem with them was we don't really know how well they would have been. I think they were 100,000 or something, but by joining those volunteers, you were exempted from the militia duty. So it's always hard to determine how well they would have been. Now, this is in stark contrast to the French army, which was one of the best in Europe by far. I mean, also under command of Napoleon and going under reorganization and everything. And so it was a very disciplined and large and also strong and effective force, whereas the British was a rather small force. So, which brings us to the next part, the state of the navies. Now, the revolution, the French Revolution, disrupted the French Navy because the officers and everyone, they didn't get along as well, and then they were rebuilding the Navy. Also, they lost in the expedition to Egypt and lost in the Battle of Nile, Abu Qir. They lost quite a part. And one major difference was always that for strategic reasons, the British, or the English, better the English, had way stronger ships. They were slower, but they were stronger and sturdier. The French had faster ships that could react faster, but they were also weaker built. So in a major battle, in this type of warfare, it was usually about the staying power. Additionally, the English had way better personnel in the long run because they always lived from the sea. So when they impressed certain sailors, they had plenty of sailors available and experienced people that had experience in living on the sea. Whereas the French sometimes have to recruit regular soldiers and put them on their ships. And there's quite a difference in experience, which many of us, I don't think, really understand. But living on the sea, from what I read in many accounts now, you get a certain feeling of it for the wind and everything. Not even speaking about seasickness, but more you get a better intuition about this. And the British definitely had this on many levels, whereas the French didn't. And additionally, in 1803, the Royal Navy was close to its peak in power. So they were both very experienced in major fleet actions, so fighting in a large formation, but also in single ship action. So they were the leading country in this regard. And also they had very experienced commanders. This, of course, the British used to fight any invasion or to disrupt it or to harass it from the very beginning or from the stages of early on, before it even could start. So basically what they did, they blockaded Toulon, Brest, Den Helder, which is in Holland, and Boulogne, where the invasion fleet was built up, Rochefort, and also later on Cadiz in Spain. So they did blockades. There were different kinds of blockades, like close brigade, and I think the other was more distance or loose blockade, but basically they always kept kept a look on the various ports and sometimes harassed them and attacked them. This also meant that the French needed to build up forts and harbors. So most people think just about building up, you need more ships for invasion fleet, you need to build up your ships. But as Lavery pointed out, I think he especially noted that building up all those harbors was even way more expensive and tiresome than just building the ships. But so you need to build the whole infrastructure. And this is what people usually always ignore about any kind of invasion, especially amphibious invasion or anything. You need to have the infrastructure. You need to build this up. You need to have the harbors. You need to have the ships. You need to have the support craft and everything. So, and then, so the British kept them on a short leash all the time. So basically to prevent that the various fleets could merge into a bigger fleet, especially then when Spain joined in 1804. Now another aspect is that Napoleon completely underestimated the problems of the sea and of warfare on the sea, of naval combat. He invested a lot. He built up major harbors and also forts around them, and about 1,200 vessels were built. I think the original goal were around 2,000, but they never reached that. And this is the problem again. As said many times, naval strategy is build strategy. It takes years or decades. This is quite in contrary if you look at the French, how fast they raised the armies. And again and again and again. I mean, if you look at Napoleon, he lost most of the Grand Army in 1812, 1813 in Russia. But then in 1815, he still fought with quite a considerable force at Waterloo. And at this point, he was already at war with a large part of Europe for more than a decade. So this you can't do with ships. If you lose too much ships, you just can't recruit them or build them so fast. And there was a very interesting situation that happened with Napoleon. He ordered one admiral to refuel the ships and to get them out of the harbor, I think in Boulogne. And the admiral refused because he said, okay, there's a strong wind coming up. And I think he threatened him with a whip or something. And he ordered another admiral to do it, another rear admiral. And basically he lost 13 ships due to the wind and also due to attacks from the English. So, and this was the situation to a certain degree. He was more like this impulse land warfare guy, whereas for the sea you need, it seems, a lot of patience and the long duration and everything. So I'm also more of a land guy. And at one point I think he stated, if we can control the channel for 6 hours, we are the masters of the world, or something along those lines. And he later revised it to 45 to 50 days. Now the question is, what happened? Most of you will think, okay, the Battle of Trafalgar happened in October 1805 and then the invasion threat was gone. Which is not entirely correct. The threat was already gone basically in August 1805. And this was since in July 1805 the French tried to merge some of their fleets, but there was some fleet action at the Cape of Venice, which is outside of Spain, and the French were basically driven off, I think by Admiral Calder, who only inflicted a minor tactical victory and was actually prosecuted for that because the demands by the British were already that high for basically annihilating the fleet all the time of the enemy. But on the strategic sense, it was a strategic decisive victory. And the reaction was in August 1805 that the French army left Boulogne and marched off to attack Austria and Russia, the allies of the British at this point. So, and then in October, the Battle of Trafalgar happened, which basically put the last nail into the coffin of the French fleet and of any possible invasion chances of Napoleon of England. So, in general, to sum it up, the chances which are according to the British naval historian Lavery, and he said the chances were very low. The French always had in their plans that there was good weather in the channel, and he notes basically you can't even assume good weather nowadays. I mean, we know from D-Day that it was postponed to several times because of weather changes. And in a time when you have to sail by the wind, mostly, of course, many of the naval craft were also using rows, as far as I know, the smaller ones, but still you need to get across the channel with your support force and everything. So if you have in your plan, okay, we have good weather for I don't know how long, yeah, it's usually not going to turn out. And the other thing is naval superiority. The Royal Navy had naval superiority, and there were almost no chances that the French could take the naval superiority away from the British. They had more ships, they had stronger ships, they had more experienced people, and they have also way more fighting experience in both fleet actions and individual combat. And so it was a gamble. He says basically it was, at best it would have been a gamble that had a certain minor amount of chances, because even if you land in England, you still need to support your troops. This is the thing, logistics don't go away. You need to support them to a certain degree. And also, if you're defending there, you need to have the staying power to overwhelm the whole country. Of course, there's always the psychological aspect to it. If the leaders or something happens and everything breaks together, but this, again, it's a gamble, and it's a gamble with very, very low chances. So in one sentence, basically the chances were extremely low. I hope this answered your question sufficiently, and be sure to check out the sources if you don't trust me or if you want to know more. And also you might check out my Sea Lion video, which is a very extensive look at the chances in 1940. And if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.